Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're replacing the factory head unit on this 2018 Hyundai Elantra. Now in this install we're going to show you how to remove this factory radio. We'll head to the bench, show you the parts that we're going to need for the install, including the radio, dash kit, and wiring harness. We'll come back here to get everything reinstalled. Let's get started. All right, so before we jump into things, couple of things to note. There's different trim Elantras that will have different radio styles. This is the base trim. The base trim has the basic radio. With this base trim, harnesses and parts do differ from higher trim. So if you have the touchscreen version, you are still able to replace that radio. However, harnesses and such will vary slightly. So we'll make those notes in the description and we can talk about it a little bit more at the bench. Additionally, for our trim here, we don't have a factory amplifier, but we do have stereo volume controls that we will want to retain with the new radio. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to jump on this side, start pulling off trim. We have some vinyl panel tools that we use for dash removal. We're going to use a couple of different various ones. And we have a Phillips screwdriver that we're going to use to pull out some screws. First up, let's go ahead and remove this panel here. A couple of clips. Now, what that's going to expose is a Phillips screw right here on this trim piece. On the driver's side, same process. Go ahead and pop this panel out. So with the trims now removed from both sides here, next around the gauge cluster and top of the steering column need to come out of the way. Next here we're going to have two screws here at the bottom of the radio. Now after those two screws are removed, we can remove the radio trim. There it goes. Now, we'll need to take this over to the bench because we need to snag the vents out of this panel. The radio itself is going to be held in with 4 screws, 2 on each side. Let's remove those. All right, so with those screws removed, go ahead and give the radio a tug. Should unclip here, and you're going to have some various harnesses on the back of the radio. Most harnesses have a little tab you press in, so it releases the lock, and the harness should slide on out. Okay, let's take our factory radio and the OEM trim bezel. Let's head over to the bench to show you the parts that we're going to need for our install. All right, so here at the bench now, the parts that we're going with in our install today, first and foremost is the radio we've chosen to install. Now the customer wants this Alpine ILX-W670. Features both wired CarPlay and wired Android Auto. Now to accommodate this aftermarket radio in the factory location, we need some adapter parts. And the dash kit we need, this calls for the Metra 957376B. Again, we're going to have to transfer over some components from the factory trim bezel and allow us to install a traditional double dam. We need wiring harness adapters, and again, this is going to vary based on the trim level of your vehicle. Because ours is the base trim model, we need the Metra 70-7304 basic harness adapters here. These harness adapters are going to allow us to integrate our new radio and its specific harness into the vehicle. To keep those steering wheel volume controls working, we're going to Pack Audio SWI RC-1. This will work great, and actually conveniently enough, it comes already pre-pinned for those steering wheel volume control connections. So all we have to do is integrate our adapter into these wires. There's no hard wiring needed. Now, the last thing to note, it's common for Hyundai and Kia vehicles where the USB and aux port in the center console, generally it's on its own protected circuit. Unfortunately, there's really no great way to retain it, especially for data transfer using like CarPlay and Android Auto. It's not a simple pass-through. So we're going to add our new USB port into the dash, and that's going to allow us to keep that wired CarPlay and wired Android Auto port convenient. It's going to replace one of the power sockets there, and unfortunately the factory USB and aux will become obsolete. First thing we're going to focus on is our wiring here. So we're going to grab our Metro harness, and we're going to grab the harness that was included with the radio. Today we're going to be soldering our connections, but you can use crimp caps or butt connectors to make your connections. Just don't twist and tape or use wire nuts. It's just not designed for an automotive application. All right, so we've went ahead and start preparing our wiring harnesses to be connected and soldered up. And for the most part, it's going to be color for color, but you always want to check the function of the wire connects to the appropriate function of the harness, because you don't want to accidentally guess and get something wrong, create damage to the vehicle, because not 100% of the time every manufacturer is going to follow the aftermarket standard. Now we went ahead and strip these ends here and strip these ends here. We've got bare wires. Like I said, we're going to be soldering here today. And in our instance, it's actually almost 99% going to be color for color. Now additionally here, besides the radio harness and the Hyundai harness adapter, we do have our steering wheel control harness adapter. And we're going to have to set those dip switches based on the diagram that we're going to pull online. Now, this harness adapter, it's a universal module, and don't let it scare you that it has so many wires hanging off. It's because it's universal, it has many different applications, and you're not going to use most of them. In our case, all we need for our Hyundai is a white with a red stripe, both black wires, and a red power wire. All these other ones are not needed, so we're going to cap them off. We only need those 4 wires out of this whole bunch. There is a ton of extra wiring that came with this module, and we didn't need all of that. We didn't even need the inline fuse on the yellow wire, because that is on constant 12 volt, which we don't need for our application. We have a long purple with a white stripe. That's our backup camera trigger wire. We'll cover where that connects in our part 2, where we install a backup camera on this Hyundai. Now on this harness, our speaker harness, it's color for speaker wires, has a power antenna, which is solid blue, and if you don't have a power antenna on your radio harness, you could just tie it into red. And then we didn't use orange, because orange is generally illumination or also dimmer. Those are interchangeable for the most part. With the radio, our Alpine actually does that through sensors on the radio. There's no analog turn on. It does it for us, so we didn't need to hook that up, so we just insulated that. On this side here, power, ground, we tied in our steering wheel control harness into the ground. As you can see, we just teed into that. Same thing with solid red on our steering wheel control harness. We tied into that. We also added an extra. We always do that. We're going to power our backup camera off of it. So we just let a little pigtail off. And then for steering wheel controls, there is a green with a white stripe on this harness, and that goes to our white with a red stripe. So we solder that in there. We didn't need the other one, the blue with the red stripe. It didn't call for it in our pack instructions. Now, we also added a parking brake bypass. These are only needed for Alpine and Pioneer units. And so we threw this in. With our Alpine, we can't access our settings on the radio unless the parking brake is applied. And so we usually add these bypasses in. Again, if you have basically any other brand, you can just ground it. But Alpine and generally Pioneer, you'll need some sort of bypass. So we added that there. And that goes into our Alpine's yellow with a blue stripe. Outside of that, we're done here. It's, for the most part, all good to go. So what we're going to do at this point in time is we're going to move our heat shrink up and over those connections, and we're going to shrink them down with a heat gun. All right, so with our harness all done here, now we like to go ahead and insulate it with some high temperature Tesa tape. Just gives it a little more protection to the dash. Alternatively, you can just zip tie it up. Then we need to program our steering wheel volume controls. And then lastly, turn our attention over to the radio to get it mounted in the dash kit. All right, one quick note here, as we noticed. So the ILX W670, this version of this Alpine radio, they actually did away with a 3.5 millimeter jack input. That's been on traditionally almost all Alpines in the last decade. And they've done away with this plug. So this doesn't simply plug in. It's kind of frustrating. And their pack instructions online say to use this, but it doesn't indicate with the newer units where this would plug into. So after some research, PAC has actually released a tech brief for this specific radio, if you're doing the W670, that you'll no longer use this. You'll set up your dip switches. So 1 through 8, so 1 and 2 are up, is off. 3 through 6 are down, which is on. And 7 and 8 are up, which is off. And instead of programming it like an Alpine, you program it like a Pioneer. So 1 through 3 is down, which is on, and number 4 is up, which is off. Now, you won't follow these last 4 dip switches for the W650, for example, the previous generation. You'll program this like an Alpine, which number 1 is on, number 2 and 3 are off, which are up. But because we have to program it like a Pioneer, it looks like that. Now, you'll go to PAC's website, and you'll put in your radio and vehicle information into the SWI RC1, and it basically shows you how to set up your dip switches. Now, because we're not using this, the tech brief, instead of using basically this cable, you instead use the blue with the yellow stripe, which is traditionally used, for example, with Kenwood and JVCs. And then you tie it into SW1 and SW2, just like that. We won't use SWG or ground. We'll insulate that. And so you tie these two together into this one, and then in the settings of the Alpine, we'll select that it's with adapter. So that's your connection here. We won't use this. We don't need the brown or the black here either. And that's on this secondary harness, where again, it used to be a 3.5 millimeter jack, and they've done away with it on this radio. Hopefully, maybe they'll bring it back. We'll see. This will plug into our radio here. We just tied up our harnesses. We don't need our vehicle speed sense. We'll have to instead install the included GPS antenna with our radio. The little pigtail off for our backup camera, which we'll do in the other video. Our reverse gear trigger wire, we'll lift that out as well. And a remote turn on in case we add an amplifier in another video. So that's basically done. Got everything nice and tidied here with some high temperature tape. So we're done with the harness more or less. Now let's turn our attention over to our dash kit. All right, so we got our dash kit out here. Now we'll carefully set this off to the side. We don't want to scratch it at all. We're going to grab the new trim from the old radio. There's going to be 3 screws on each vent that we need to transfer over to the new kit. Tabs here. I'm just using my fingernail to pop the tabs open. Removed. Grab our new kit here, flip it over in the same orientation. Don't lose the screws because we'll use the same screws. Get these all aligned here. Now you don't want to over tighten these screws, so I'm going to use a Phillips screwdriver. All right, so we got our kit all assembled here. Simple enough to transfer those on over. The side brackets don't clip into this, so we'll have to take the radio in and out a couple of times to figure out the right depth of the radio in the kit itself, because if we don't want to accidentally install it with the radio set too far back or too far forward. We want a nice look there that fills in the space. So we'll have to go into the car and pull it in and out a couple of times just to get the depth just right. All right, so we got our depth about right. It's about right there, the screw locations on both sides. So we're done with this. We're going to go ahead and run our mic. We usually like to put that on the top of the A-pillar and just pull it through the dash. We need to install our GPS antenna, and we're also going to do our USB flush mount adapter. All right, we went ahead and replaced one of the power sockets here. Just pulled off the gear shifter, and then this whole panel just literally unclips. And we went ahead and glued in our new USB. Again, these are on its own protected circuit. Unfortunately, we wish we could get those working, but it's just not available at the moment. So with that in there, this will run now all the way up to back behind the radio, plug into the radio itself. So we're done with our center console here. All right, so we're back here in the car at this point in time when you get the radio back into the dash. Now, like I said, we went ahead and spent the time to get the depth of the radio just about all perfect here. We grabbed our harness adapter, we assembled on the bench, Let's go ahead and make those connections here. They are keyed differently, so they only go in one specific spot. Just like that. Make sure they're nice and tight. We can tuck that back into the dash. Don't forget to hook up your antenna. Now on our radio itself, it does have a GPS antenna. There's no metal above it, just plastic. So we can mount that right to the top of the radio chassis. Nice and convenient. Let's go ahead and connect our harnesses here. All right, now we're going to tuck everything back in. And we're just going to get a screw in there, and we're going to test everything before we do a final reassembly. Okay, so radio's back in. At this point in time, we're going to go ahead and finish up the rest of the trim. Here's a little USB that we installed in that location. All right, so we got the radio all booted up. Everything's all back together. It's looking great. We went ahead and our volume controls are working with the radio, which is fantastic. Now, like I said, we did a backup camera here. You can call upon it manually, or you can put it in reverse. It'll automatically come on for you. Currently, the trunk is open. That's why it's looking at the ceiling. But overall, if you want to see that video, we'll link that video in the description for you. And if you like any of the parts that we used in today's video, we'll link those as well in the description at your convenience. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe and post great content on the channel all the time. We'll see you in the next video.